yours.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to be talking about school year transitions today. My name is Kate Friedman. My pronouns are they, them. I am a queer, non-binary, neurodivergent inclusion consultant, and I specialize in disability and gender inclusion.
And hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. My name is Aaron Lanoux. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an educational consultant focusing on strength-based inclusive practices to help reach all kinds of kids in all kinds of settings. Happy to have you here today.
Yeah. So for today, we will be talking about four main topics. The first one is understanding change. The second is what does it look like to prime kids for that change? The third is how do we validate the emotions that kids are feeling when change and transition comes up? And the fourth one is strengths. How do we just include kids' strengths and really play on strengths in order to help make transition smoother? So our promise from us to you is that you will leave with new understanding, practical language, and simple tools for supporting your child through transition and change. And our goals tonight are for you to understand how change can be processed, for you to be able to support children going through transition and change, and for you to be able to feel confident co-creating tools with children for navigating these transitions.
Yeah, and just one point on that last goal, that the point is to co-create these tools, to do them alongside with your child, so they're done more meaningfully and to follow their lead, and so they're involved in the creation as well.
And our premise is that preparing for change is powerful. We really want to support children with transition and change and ensure that any adult who is working with them is starting with their strengths. And so with that, we're going to start by talking about understanding change. So this year, or these past few years, we've all gone through a lot of change through the coronavirus, and we know how that has affected work, school, life, and our families. We've also experienced change if you've ever waited for the subway and seen something like this, hopefully not, where you either have a subway coming in an hour or 1,534 minutes.
And those experiences on this large scale of dealing with a global pandemic and on a smaller but still significant, impactful scale of the unexpected change of waiting for a train that's just not coming, can really impact us, these kinds of changes and transitions. And we want to start our discussion of talking about understanding change by talking about the opposite, by talking about routine. When we have a routine, when things happen in a predictable manner, things are clear for us. They're predictable and they're expected. And this tends to, for many people, bring a sense of comfort. Things are predictable and clear. You know what's happening. And so it helps us to feel more kind of settled and grounded because we know what to expect. However, when there is a change to our routine, an unexpected change or a transition to a new way of being and a new routine, these things are not true anymore. Things aren't as clear, things aren't as expected or predictable. And so oftentimes, instead of things feeling comfortable and known, things can feel new and unclear because they're not predictable. Things are unexpected, which may result in feelings of discomfort or feeling even slightly afraid or stressed because we aren't able to anticipate what's going to happen anymore. And this is true of all humans, not just our children who are going through transitions and changes from one school year to the next, other kinds of transitions throughout the year, between school years. And so we want to think about change and transition on multiple levels, transitions big and small. And so the focus of our time here today is on transitions like the one you see on the top here. The big change from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school, from one school to another because of a change in setting, for example. But we also want to recognize that the challenges, the difficulties that come up, as well as the tools that we'll be talking about to support them, they also relate to changes on different levels. Just the transition from a school year to the summer is its own kind of transition. On a smaller scale, the daily transition from going from school to home is its own kind of transition. even on a micro level, a change from one task to a different task while your child is working on homework at home does signal its own kind of transition where there is a little bit of a change, where some of the things we'll be talking about today might be relevant. So we are going to be focusing on big changes and how we support that. We just want to have an eye towards, we want to be thinking about how these things show up on a smaller scale as well.
And also, if you're thinking about, because it is May, the transition from the school year to the summer, our last talk on visual supports talks about all of the different kinds of strategies and structures that are in place in school that you could mirror at home in the summer to help smooth that transition.
Be sure to check that out. So again, just grounding ourselves in understanding change. As mentioned earlier, change and discomfort around change is a human thing. It's relatively universal. And so because of that, we can relate if a child is going through an experience where change is uncomfortable. We can relate and we can understand the commonalities in experience. We've experienced fear, discomfort from things changing. We can understand and relate that our children might be experiencing something similar.
I like to think of this as the I know what you mean part.
Yeah. What we want to note and sort of challenge us to push ourselves to recognize also, however, is that we can relate and also empathize. The empathizing piece is about committing to knowing that we may not fully understand our children's challenges, right? We can relate because we know change is hard, new things can be scary, those are universals. But if you are the parent or family member supporting a child who is neurodivergent, who has a disability, chances are they may be experiencing those changes in a different way. They may be experiencing those transitions more intensely, and they may need a different kind or different level of support than we ourselves might need in our lives now, than we might have needed when we were children. Because of the different ways that they're experiencing change. And that's just an important piece to recognize. It doesn't stop at relating. I know change is hard, and also this kind of change might feel even more hard for my child.
I like to think of this as the I know what you mean, and it might feel different for you.
Yeah, great.
All right, so as we are thinking about change, we're going to watch a short video about when your child is experiencing change, it might bring up things in you as the adult, things from your past, things that you might not even be aware of that are impacting how you respond to your child when they are in the midst of a change or transition. So we want to think about what's coming up for you and when you watch this video and how it could affect how you empathize with your child.
Parents. Throughout history, we've struggled to get it right. We hope we won't pass on our emotional issues to our kids, and we swear we won't make the same mistakes our parents did. We all have great intentions, but something seems to get in the way. Let's look at what that might be. At Circle of Security Parenting, we believe that being emotionally available to our children and their needs is the key to doing our best as parents. We call emotional availability being with. It means teaching emotional intelligence by being with our children in all their feelings, like sadness, joy, anger, curiosity, pain, frustration, excitement, and so on. Being with children helps them understand, trust, and move on from feelings. And knowing someone is with them in their feelings helps children feel less overwhelmed and more secure. Decades of research backs this up. For parents, some of this comes easily, but other times our children express emotions that make us uncomfortable, so we pull away or try to overrule their feelings, which leaves them on their own. We do this because our children's feelings can trigger strong emotions in us. We think of it like this. Our history during childhood of how core people responded to our different emotions creates the background music for how we experience our children's feelings. Let's look at this example. This girl and her father have been enjoying time together in the park, but suddenly aware of the time, Dad says, "We need to go." When the girl hears this, she starts crying and gets increasingly angry. All at once, the dad's background music changes. The background music that is playing for the father right now, we call shark music. As it turns out, the dad's own mother was uncomfortable with loud displays of emotion, and she didn't know how to handle them. So throughout his childhood, she repeatedly told her son it was pathetic to cry, and she never ever asked him about his feelings of sadness or anger. His ability to deal with his daughter's emotion now is greatly affected by the experience with his mother then. Shark music, we're rarely aware it's playing, but it's our past experiences telling us to be afraid of or uncomfortable with a feeling or need that is actually safe. When our shark music limits our ability to respond to these feelings, our children learn to hide or feel ashamed of them. This is a problem because we're teaching our children to fear emotions that are actually both safe and essential in life. Most of us experience shark music with one emotion or another, and it's different for everyone. But whenever it is triggered, our ability to respond to our children's needs is limited. The good news is, by simply calling it by name and reflecting on what our children need in the moment, we can turn down our shark music. This is so important because if we can learn to manage our history of negative experiences and perceptions, we can respond to the truth of our child's current situation and be with them in it.
So, we're curious if anything is coming up for you. You're welcome to put it in the chat or the Q&A if you feel like you want to share. And I want to just call attention to the little girl in the video who, as soon as she was told that it's time to go, started crying and sort of having a meltdown. We're going to move into our next section, which is called priming. And this is what we do to prepare kids well in advance, not in the moment, for a transition or change. And really the key piece to this, there's two key pieces. The first is like understanding what the expectation is and preparing kids for that. And the second is telling kids in a calm moment, not when the change is about to happen. And so this could have happened maybe 10, 15 minutes earlier, where the dad could have said, hey, in about 10, 15 minutes, we're gonna get ready to go. What is the last thing that you wanna do at the park before we leave?
Yeah. That's great. It's a really good segue into our discussion of priming. The other thing I'll connect from the video is just to be thinking about if anything from this video might have resonated with you in your own experience. This isn't meant to be a therapy session. However, dealing with and coping with the very real reactions we have to our pasts and our emotional selves is a part of this work. And so in addition to talking about very practical skills like priming, we want to allow and invite and validate the challenges that these situations that we're describing often bring up, and hope that the video spoke to some folks about recognizing the reality of that and a little bit about what to do with it.
And even the idea of being with a kid in a strong emotion instead of trying to stop it is something that takes a lot of practice, right?
Yeah.
Like, please do not beat yourselves up if you try this once and you get stuck in an old behavior pattern. Like, that happens, you know. It's really like, it's really something you have to practice doing.
Yeah. So we'll actually be getting to the idea of being with a little bit later when we
Yeah.
talk about validating. And we are going to start with this first technique, this first tool of priming. So you may not be able to tell even from looking at this, but this is a traffic jam. One of maybe the world's worst traffic jams. I don't know if that is a 99 lane highway or what, but maybe this evokes, speaking of big emotions for people who maybe drive. Traffic is no fun. It's another universal. Most people don't enjoy it and are triggered by it. And yet there's been
I'm
yeah.
sorry, private pause. For some reason, I think when you went back to share, it has you in the corner as instead of you being the speaker. So I don't know if if we can flip that, it might be on your end. But while we do that, can we also have our Spanish and Mandarin interpreters please reread the lines? Just so for any families that came in after the 7:04 hour can hear the conference call lines if they don't know it already, but they're also in the chat.
Para las personas que quisieran ingresar y escuchar esta plática en español, favor de marcar el siguiente número: 720-527-5818. Repito, número es 720-527-5818. Y la clave de ingreso es la siguiente: 1605474, símbolo numeral. Repito, 1605474, símbolo numeral. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
And can our Mandarin interpreter also read the conference line out for our families?
有需要中文家长的翻译，请您拨打翻译热线电话763-296-7275，然后输入会议密码109751。再播报一遍，如果你需要中文翻译的家长，请您拨打电话763-296-7275，然后输入会议密码109751。谢谢 ，Thank you。
Thank you. Rochelle or Jonathan, are you seeing the main speaker on the middle of the screen for the main screen?
What do you mean by main
So when
speaker?
someone's speaking, you see them in the center. I just want to make sure that it's just not my view, but everyone is not having an issue.
I don't think I did.
Okay, so there might be just something on this end. So my apologies. Aaron, you're fine. Sorry, Aaron and Kate.
That's right. If it helps to spotlight us, you can.
Copy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Andre, and thank you again to the interpreters too. Glad we were able to provide that. So we were talking about traffic and how traffic is a universal stressor for many of us. And fortunately, something has developed in our world and technology, something that is more or less everywhere, that has helped us cope with traffic a little bit. And that is Google Maps or Waze or whatever app you might use. And specifically, not just helps us like figure out if we take a different exit and avoid the traffic, but if the traffic is unavoidable, it helps us by letting us know that traffic is coming. So if you are here on the road, and all of a sudden you see, oh, in a little while, there's going to be a red line, that lets us know to expect this challenge, that it's coming up. And I don't know if everyone experiences this in the same way I do. I find a little bit of comfort knowing I got a heads up that the traffic is coming, and I have a general sense of about how long it might last. Let me scroll on the screen and see if this is going to be the entire length of the highway. Oh, it's going to be 4 extra minutes. Even though traffic still stinks, knowing that it's coming and knowing that it is contained can help it feel a little bit better. And that, in essence, is what priming is all about. We're preparing children for an upcoming challenge or change, even if it's going to be a challenge, so that they can ready themselves for it. So priming is all about sharing what your child can expect during and after a transition or change, right? Sharing what they can expect to happen. Describing it as concretely as possible. So rather than, oh, things are going to be different tomorrow at this new school, what is going to be different? What can they expect, right? We want to name the things as much as we know the information to share. And it also involves researching and investigating what we don't know. And as we were talking about co-creation before, with your child if possible. We're going to share some examples, but as a quick example of this idea of research and investigate, going on the school website of the middle school or new school that your child may be attending to take a look at what the classrooms look like, what the hallway looks like, might provide some concrete information that can help demystify, can help clear up what they expect to see when they start school in the new school year. So to talk a little bit more concretely about priming, we're going to talk about a couple of examples of what it can look like. Last time that we were together, and you can find on YouTube, we talked about visual supports, and using visuals for all sorts of reasons is really beneficial, and visuals can really support priming. Visuals create a concrete reference that you can return to. So it's something you can look at together, stow away, and come back to in a way that you can't necessarily with language, with sharing something in the moment. So a couple of quick examples of what it might look like to prime using visuals. We have here an example of what Kate and I often use in the classroom, which was a quick visual to remind students it's okay to raise your hand now, or time to put your hands down. So it just primes students for the times of the lesson when they can participate. But more to our purposes here tonight, you see a dry erase board with a list of things. It says summer, and then a couple of things that might be on there. Just writing down a list of things that your child might be able to expect that'll be different or new in the summer, again, makes a concrete reference that simply saying it in words might not benefit in the same way. And using calendars, whether they're on your refrigerator at home or digital or whatever you might use with your family, putting things on the calendar, Xing out days, circling days, making notes, helps to prepare for things that are coming up in the future.
I find that also just printing out like a simple calendar like this and the act of every day crossing off a day, knowing that you're getting closer and closer to a change, can sometimes alleviate anxiety. It can also increase anxiety. You have to, know your child and to decide if this would be the right tool.
Another visual idea to share is to draw a map of what your child's new school, in this case it says middle school map, what a new middle school might look like. You could either get this from the school website, maybe at a school tour, the principal, assistant principal, parent coordinator, someone might have handed this out. Maybe you know someone who has gone to this school, but using whatever information you have available to actually draw out, oh, this is what the map of the hallway, the 6th grade hallway looks like. Here are the room numbers. It looks like you might have ELA in this room, and to go to math, look, you just have to cross the hallway. Then when it's time to get ready for lunch, the lockers are like 3 doors down. So you're gonna have to pass a couple of rooms so you can go to your locker. Just to make that more clear and concrete for your child, again, might alleviate some worry, anxiety that comes from the not knowing, from just not being able to have a picture of what to expect.
This is also particularly helpful when something is going to become a routine but isn't yet. It helps sort of ease the transition into learning a new routine. And that way, if you're nervous or flustered, you have something to fall back on.
Absolutely. So another strategy to use with priming is to make a list. And listing out, as you saw in that dry erase board example, of things that will be new and different is a good element of this. But what we like to encourage people to do is actually to start with what will be the same. So when we make a list, it's not just here's all the things that are going to be new and different and changes. There's a comfort in starting with what will be the same. And so if let's continue to use this example of going from elementary school to middle school, or just from any school to a new school or school building, start with what do you think is going to be the same in this place?
And so, it might be that you still use the same backpack. It might be that you still take a bus to school. It might be that you still have the same subjects. And even just that, knowing that not everything is changing can be a very big relief in terms of preparing yourself for the changes to come. And then the new things might be, right, new teachers, a new building, new students, new peers.
Yeah. There's a comfort in naming the things that will not change when you're talking about changes.
It's also helpful to have, if you can, the same amount or more things that are the same, so that it's not just 1 or 2 things that are the same and a big list of things that are new. And so I was thinking, right, it could even be that I'm going to eat the same breakfast every morning. It could be simple things like that. I'm going to continue to sleep in my same bed the night before school, just to sort of reiterate all the things that will stay constant.
So while we were giving some attention to visuals, it is important to recognize that priming with language in a pinch is helpful as well. Again, we want to be clear and concrete about what upcoming change or challenge might take place. And importantly, we want to provide a strategy to help a child cope, to regulate potentially with this upcoming change. So a couple of examples of what this language might sound like. On the top, there's a speech bubble that says, at Grandpa's, we're going to talk and eat dinner. You can play Switch after we get back home. So letting your child know, let's say you're on the way there already and didn't prime your child for this change in routine, just letting them know what will happen. We're going to eat and we're going to talk. And if they ask, when can I play my Switch? When can I play my Switch? As soon as we get home, you can have some Switch time. The other one you see is a speech bubble that says, I know it can be a little scary on the first day. If you feel scared, you can pop your Pop-It in your pocket. And there next to Cade's shoulder is a little Pop-It fidget toy that, let's presume in this case, your child's familiar with, it's comfortable, it's something they have access to.
And so it's important to note that even if we're priming with language, we might be priming with language to use a physical tool as a strategy. It doesn't have to be solely an oral coping strategy. It can be a reminder that you have something physical like a fidget that can help you cope.
Yeah. And then another priming tool we want to offer is to prime with a secret signal. And this can be really powerful, especially as children get older. And maybe there's just like less comfort with mom, dad, grandma, saying, hey, get ready, we're going to prepare for this thing. But you still want to have that recognition with your child that you know that there's a change coming up. You want to support them. You're here to help them if they need it. And so what a secret signal can do is to communicate to your child, you understand that there's a challenge, and give them a little nod to that strategy that they've been taught to use to cope and regulate. So rather than saying you can use your Pop-It tool, you might ahead of time arrange with your child, okay, let's develop a secret signal. No one else has to know what this means, but when I do this, it's my signal to you that like, you've got this. I know this is hard, it's okay, but you've got this. Maybe that's not the signal you want to use. You want to use a little tip of the hat, a little tap of the brow to let your child know. Same thing. I know this might be hard, but you've got this and you've got tools. Or
This
maybe
is my favorite one.
that's a great strengths and interest based one. If you want to use a special secret signal that will be in line with something that your child is motivated by, is jazzed by, that's going to bring a smile to their face, right? So these are things to quickly kind of teach and practice with your child ahead of time. And then in those particular moments on the subway, as you're dropping them off for their first day or second or third day of school, just to give them a little reminder without making a big public deal of it, but to still communicate that recognition that you understand that there's a challenge and to instill that hope that you know they've got it. And as we wrap up priming, just a couple notes about the sort of how and when of priming. Cade mentioned earlier, like the example we saw of the child playing at the playground. It's best to do it ahead of time, and especially to do it at a calm time. So it's hard to prime like in the moment when emotions are high. It's less likely our heads up is less likely to be like heard and internalized and felt as like a warning or a reminder of things to come, and more likely to be experienced as like that change that we're and fear that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
So discussing at a calm time ahead of time. To practice calming techniques, so practice your secret signal, practice deep breaths, practice the Pop-'em toy fidget tool. And as we said with the Pop-It with Spider-Man, to use your child's strengths as a way to mitigate the discomfort and other feelings that might come up with your child. whether this is for your benefit or your child's benefit or both, it's great to just pause and take a couple breaths. Nothing is hurt by slowing down a little bit. That can be hard in the moment, but it can be so powerful to just take 1 or 2 of those breaths in preparation for using one of these priming techniques with your child.
So we have talked about understanding change. We've talked about priming and preparing kids for that change. And now we want to move into validation, which can be the hardest part, as talked about in the video we shared, right? That shark time.
Shark music.
Shark music
Yeah.
comes right in, and we want to like stop whatever we perceive as a negative emotion that a kid is feeling. And with validation, we really just want to practice being with the child in this feeling before we try to move through it or change it.
Before I want to lift a question that came in the chat before we go into validation. Were
Perfect.
there any priming suggestions that you have for teenagers? So just for adolescents, a little bit older demographic, are there any suggestions for our teenagers?
Yeah. I think the basics of everything we discussed stay the same. Visuals can help. Making a list can still be helpful. Language reminders and reminders of tools and coping strategies that your child knows are all good go-tos.
Even crossing off on a calendar or a schedule, or having notifications on your Google Calendar that let you know when something is going to be different.
Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
the principles all apply. As with in many things with adolescents, it's just about the match of what's going to be heard best
Yeah.
and internalized best. And so I think there's maybe a more matter of fact sort of presentation of things like, listen, yeah, I know you're going to high school next year. Right? It's not, so let's sit down and talk about, right? There's a difference in tone. There's a difference in matter of factness. And I think also more potentially an invitation to, so you tell me,
Yeah.
right? Invite more, tell me what you think this is going to look like.
Would a secret signal be helpful for you? Yeah. If it is, what do you think? Well, how can I signal you? What would be meaningful for you?
The other thing is, if they're at a stage where parent or other caregiver, family member is not the person who can give the thing, it's just not gonna, it's just, you're gonna be met with an eye roll. Is there someone else, a peer, a teacher, someone else in the community that can play that role where it's gonna be received better?
Maybe a
'Cause-
sibling, maybe an aunt or uncle. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of this, of course, goes with the caveat that you as families and parents know your child best and know the developmental level that will be most receptive, and personal sort of relationships and connections and strengths that can inform the best way to handle that. I hope that's a helpful answer.
All right. So moving back into validation, true or false, telling children that everything will be okay helps to ease their worries. What do you think?
I have my thoughts on the matter. You might have your own. There's pluses and minuses to this, right?
Yeah.
Reassurance is a great thing, right? Letting people know things aren't going to be as bad as they maybe are making it out to be can be a great thing. However, it can also be invalidating. When someone's worried about something and they're met with, don't worry, everything will be fine, it can serve to dismiss emotions and concerns that are very real that then don't get processed. I like to tell this story, it's told with love, about my dear Bubby, who in our family, this is my maternal grandmother, who had a reputation for, whenever anyone in the family had a concern, a challenge, something they were worried about, saying with the best of intentions and incredibly sweetly, everything will be fine, dear. And there were times when that wasn't the response we were hoping for. Sometimes when you're upset, I can't believe this happened, I don't know what to do tomorrow, instead of being met with, everything will be fine, dear, you hope for, or you're looking for someone to say like, oh, that's tough. Man, that stinks. What do you want to do about it? Do you want to go for a walk? Right? There are lots of ways to respond when someone is concerned about something. And even though this reassurance is done with the best of intentions, it can be met as invalidating sometimes.
And sometimes it just helps to validate how someone is feeling before you reassure them that everything will be okay.
Exactly.
To just be with their feelings for a moment.
So validating, this idea of validating we've touched on and gives a couple of examples of, but validating comes down to acknowledging your child's thoughts and feelings, just naming it, and also conveying that you honor their experience and perspective without the pitfall of brushing it aside, as Bubby unwittingly sometimes did in our family. Part of the reason for this is has to do with regulation, which we've touched on in both previous videos and webinars that we've done. This image says how helping kids cope improves behavior. The starting point of this flow chart says problem behavior, which I do take some issue with. That's a loaded term. But let's say there is a challenge that we'll put in that middle box there. When there's a challenge, when we invalidate the emotion, the feelings that a child is experiencing get bigger. Yeah, they're not dealt with. And because of that, a child isn't able to regulate, and that can create more challenge, let's call it, right? On the flip side, if we can validate the emotion and help help to soothe it, we're in mirror mode here. If we can validate the emotion and help to soothe it, the child can develop self-regulation strategies, and that can lead to fewer challenges, right? It helps to actually soothe and work through those emotional experiences that children are having, the being with that we talked about earlier, that we saw earlier in the video.
And you might remember from our last video, we talked about problem solving with your child and a particular technique called collaborative and proactive solutions. And even if you don't remember that, whenever you are problem solving with a child, it's great to first validate how they're feeling before going into problem solving mode. It really changes the power dynamics and the defensiveness and lets the child know that you are with them in this hard moment.
So here are some more examples of what we mean by and how validating can sound. One way to validate is by naming the challenge, simply describing, naming how hard it can be to do something. So this is a little comic that is taken from a great book, also that we've mentioned before, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, by Faber and Maslish. We'll send a reference to this in the follow-up as well. But they have a nice sort of before after, or instead of try this kind of side-by-side comic here. And in this comic, I know it's a little small, I need to lean in a little bit myself to read it. But instead of what's taking you so long when a child's tying their shoes, to say, ooh, tying shoelaces takes a lot of fancy finger work. It just recognizes and validates this challenge that a child might be experiencing, even if it's a minor one, even if it's just in this moment. The other one says, instead of, oh, adding fractions is a snap, I'll show you how. You can say, ooh, yeah, adding fractions can be hard. It's not easy to find the common denominator. So sometimes children express that things are challenging for them, or they experience challenge. And again, coming from the best of places to say like, oh, you've got this, or it's not that big a deal, or it's not that hard, we might unwittingly invalidate a challenge that a child is experiencing. And just as a starting point, to validate by naming the challenge can be a good way to recognize that they're experiencing it. It just starts off a sort of interaction or a conversation on a different footing to recognize that the child is experiencing a challenge rather than dismissing it. Another way this can look is by simply repeating, validating by repeating. So if a child expresses, oh God, I'm scared, you can say, okay, you're feeling scared. It's a very different response than there's nothing to be scared about, right? Oh, you're feeling scared. Pause. Just recognizing that they're experiencing that can be really powerful for them to feel heard. And again, as we sort of heard reflected in the video, can validate and sort of recognize that emotion as valid and important to experience in life, right? People get scared. That happens. That's okay, right? To validate by repeating, if a child says, this is scary, you can say, yeah, it can be scary to try new things. It can. We all experience that, have experienced that in our own lives, right? And even when kids get a little extreme about things, like, oh God, today's gonna be the worst day ever, instead of jumping to, oh, it wasn't that bad, to just start with, oh man, I sometimes feel like it's gonna be the worst day ever too. I have those days. And we all do, right? We often do have that feeling, even if it's not rational. We do have those common experiences. That's when we can relate.
Sometimes our kids have negative self-talk, right? And they say things like, I'm the worst, or I'm not good at anything, or I suck at everything. And in those moments, we don't necessarily want to repeat that language back to them, but we do want to empathize. And so we can say, oh, it's hard to feel that way. And even just taking that one pause, that one moment to be with them in the feeling without naming what the bad part of it is that they've just said about themselves, can help get to a better place where you can say, okay, how can I support you now? Or what do you think the next thing we should try is?
Yeah, repeating something a child is expressing is incredibly powerful. Our caution is not to repeat something, and it feels uncomfortable to, right? To repeat something that is a child has said that's negative about themselves. That's not something we want to sort of reinforce. However, we don't want to dismiss it or invalidate it either. And this phrase, "Oh, it can be hard. It's hard to feel that way," might be a go-to if you have a child who expresses these kinds of things. It might be a good one to practice.
And you can think about what version of this will work for your child, right? If you're thinking about high schoolers, teenagers, you might even want to practice saying this in the mirror to yourself to make sure that it's coming across like you're speaking with an adult rather than like you're speaking down to a smaller child.
Yeah, to our earlier question too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might sound like, oh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And pause. I will also add that in these examples we're giving, it's not the end of the strategy to
Right.
just say this and then you're done and everything's better. There's a sort of ... here, right? One other example that we want to offer is simply the language, I believe you. This was recommended by a friend and colleague who's a terrific school psychologist, Jillian Boudreau, who said that just the power of having it named that you are believed, that your experience is, it validates your experience.
And we were thinking about times when your child might say something like, I've done this before, but I just can't do it right now, right? And so instead of jumping into that, oh, you just give it another try, you can just say, I believe you. Like, I believe how you're feeling right now. I get it. And then the pause, and then the, okay, what can I do? How can we move forward?
Yeah. One sort of caveat, one pitfall to avoid that I think is pretty common is this one. It's understandable to follow a validating statement. Oh yeah, this can be hard with, but I know you can do it. Or, but it's not that bad.
Yeah.
We really want to encourage
No buts.
trying to avoid that word. What that word does is signal that everything came before it actually isn't true or doesn't matter or isn't real. If you say, yeah, I know this feels a little scary, but you can do it. The recognition that we just offered, that I know this is scary, becomes secondary, and all that a child might hear is, it's not a big deal, you can do it. Again, we want to convey both, but we want to be really mindful about the message that we're sending. Oh yeah, this can be scary. Pause. When things are scary, what are some things that we could do to make them less scary together without the but? You still get to the next step, but without invalidating that validating language you just used.
That could also sound like, I believe you. Pause. What if we started this together? Or what do you need to start on your own right now?
Yeah. So as we wrap up talking about validation. We want to continue to recognize the human beings that are offering this validation, you all, families and parents, and remind you all, offer to you all to allow yourself some self-compassion, to be kind with yourselves when you're not able to do these things that we're describing. We're both pretty calm right now. We're happy to be here with you. We don't have a child in the background who is experiencing a challenge that triggers us. We're able to talk about all of this calmly in sort of the best of circumstances. And we recognize that this is an artificial setting for us to be talking about some real challenges that really do trigger things in folks. So when you're not able, when you do say but, or when you do jump to, it's not that bad, upon reflecting on it, we hope that you are not harsh with yourself. We hope that you don't beat yourself up, because we all make sort of missteps and can't remember these things, and instead are gentle with yourselves, to recognize that this is really hard work and does trigger a lot of things for ourselves. And that only by forgiving ourselves sometimes when things don't go the way we would have liked, can we move through it and sort of improve next time.
All right, we're going to move into our last section, which is strengths. We've talked about understanding change, priming kids for change, validating their emotions when there's a big transition. And now we want to really tap into, okay, there's going to be a big transition, something like changing schools. How do we really tap into kids' strengths to prepare them and others for these big changes? So the first thing we want to share with you is a mood board of strengths on a Google slide. And this is an example from a former student, a grad student of mine, where this is a great tool to make with just simple images and some simple text about your child that you make with your child to prepare a new teacher or new students to meet you, right? Sometimes that first day can be really, really hard. To sort of like share about who you are and your personality and what you're good at. And sometimes you might have a meltdown, and then that's the thing that your first day is remembered by. And so this is a great way to help prepare both your child, to remind them of their strengths, but also the people they're going to meet. And maybe you send this to the teacher in advance. Maybe even if this is a mid-school year change, the teacher can share this with the class to help the class get to know your child before they come, if that's something that your child says would be helpful for them. And there's no like great format for this. Any format works, right? Like you can have photos of your child, no photos of your child. You can use Google images of their favorite books and movies and Sonic the Hedgehog. You know, if your family has a different culture or ethnicity, you can include information about that, favorite subjects. It really can be as much or as little as your child feels comfortable sharing, as long as it is things that are really important, interesting, to your child. And here's another example, also made in Google Slides, that Aaron and I made, one for me and one for him, to share things about us, things that make us unique, things that we love to do, things that are energy drainers and energy rechargers. And this is a template we'll share with you that if the previous slide feels like too much, this is a template and you can just plop stuff in with your child as another way to sort of share who your kid is. From a positive place, and not just like the previous report card and like numbers, but something that's more substantial.
Yeah. The other thing about this template, Kate and I did it very similarly, as you can see, but when we share the template, you can take a look and see that the categories are interchangeable. So you can slide out that thing that says things that can be hard, and you can slide in a little box that says things that make me happy or strategies that help me. So there's a lot of options on this, and by looking at this with your child to say like, which of these 4 boxes do you want to put in here to share with your teacher for next year, is a great way to do that co-creation of like, what matters to you? What do you feel like sharing that will be important for them to know? And we just have anecdotal evidence that both for the 2 of us as adults, but also for a couple of children who have used this template, we've experienced and people have expressed that there's something really powerful and kind of uplifting almost about cataloging, about listing the things that you are good at, or even things that like, oh, this is a little hard for me. There's something really powerful about like naming that and expressing that. Just the act of doing it, but also doing it knowing that it's going to be shared with someone so they can know you better. It's a pretty powerful experience.
and that you get to decide what's shared and someone isn't deciding for you is really key. You can also, if you like the way this looks but don't want to do all the digital stuff, you can just print it right out and draw or write right in it. And we were also thinking that like this would be a fun thing to share with a teacher to say, hey, maybe you want to do this with the whole class. Or even like within your family, maybe everyone wants to make a little page and you can learn about each other.
Yeah.
All right, so another way to prepare people who might be meeting your child in a brand new setting is to make a photo book and have some captions. And this can look so many different ways, right? This is a printed out kind of fancy version, but it also has some kid drawings in it. You can also just print photos out like at CVS and glue them into a folded paper and handwrite captions. But the trick for this also is that your child is choosing the photos that are meaningful and deciding on what the text will say. And this could be something they bring to class the first day as a way to get to know me, where again, the child is getting to choose what's important to share. And it's not just what the teacher knows from like a previous report card or teacher. And our last suggestion, which is actually kind of one of my favorites, is because everyone has report cards and the report cards are often not really reflecting who you are. And so you can annotate either a portfolio of your work or your report card. And this is an example of just using Post-its where a child can say, this is what I learned this year in this class or in ELA on the whole. So that those 3s and 4s or whatever the numbers are, aren't as sort of devoid of who the child is, the essence of the child, and is a way to really share with an upcoming teacher, what are you walking in with, right? What do you want them to know about you, right? That you really love dogs and that you've really gotten really into learning about dogs. That's an important thing for a new teacher to know. And if you're in high school, you might actually just make a separate table with all of the subjects that you've learned and a sentence or two about what you learned, what was hard for you, areas that you grew in, and to like, paperclip this right to your transcript so that new teachers are getting a little bit more information about you and how you've processed the things that you've learned.
Yeah, this, especially for older students, this is a great self-advocacy technique too. Self-advocacy is a whole other topic that we can get into, and I'm sure there are resources on as well, but for a child to recognize their strengths and needs, to communicate their strengths and needs, to request support or help for things that will benefit them, a lot of elements to it. And even if it is just, here's what I learned and good at, that's an important element of self-advocacy. It doesn't have to be like asking for the help, the support. And so that's a really good practice for a high school student in particular to be more comfortable with over time.
When I've done this with high school students, we've put it on the calendar that as soon as report cards come out, like the next day, we sit down together and like make this chart so that it's still fresh in your head and it's not like you're doing all the subjects at the end of the year, right? You want to really prime kids for it.
So that was some notes on strengths. We're almost at time here. And so as we've done with our other webinars, we want to invite you to respond in the chat with a number 1, 2, 3, or 4 about the idea that is resonating with you most, that is most sticking in your mind. So for 1, we had this idea of changes in routines and transitions and the way we experience that. For 2, we had this idea of priming and how Google Maps and that little red line can help us prepare for challenges. 3, we had some notes on validation, expressing I believe you, avoiding but. And for 4, we had lots of examples of strengths-based ways to share information about your child with new people in their lives and new teachers. So if you could drop in the chat 1, 2, 3, or 4, which one is most interesting to you? Do you think you're going to try out tomorrow? And it's always helpful for us to just sort of take the temperature a little bit of like which concepts and strategies are most helpful to people as you've been listening. You're also allowed to write more than 1. People in the past have written 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is fabulous too, but helpful to kind of identify, here's my next step. This is the part that's really, really hitting me today. So we'll leave those up there for a second. Again, challenges, priming, validation, and strengths. You can drop those in the chat whenever you're ready. And we just want to wrap up and say thank you. We hope that you feel ready to support your children and yourselves as well with the challenges of change that are very real and very human. We always appreciate family members taking the time in an evening when there could be any number of things going on in your homes to learn alongside us and to take some steps to help improve things for you and your family and your children. We really appreciate you taking the time. We also just want to thank Andre and Christina, Fodi, and the rest of the team at the Special Education Office for having us to participate in these webinars. We hope they are helpful and practical and useful and validating to you all, and really appreciate you, again, taking the time to learn about this with us.
So the pleasure has been all ours. So thank you both tremendously. While we're having some, while we're allowing our families to actually vote, want to just lift some questions. So I saw some folks said that they had a problem, the chat being disabled. It's refreshed that, so you should have no problems voting. So please get those votes in. Love to share what yep, and I see them plugging in. Perfect, so coming in. But I want to uplift some questions that came in. And some of these, if we can provide an answer now, we can definitely try and provide it to our families afterwards. So one question I think it would be great for folks to hear is, do you have any suggestions or regarding books as it relates to transitions? So any books as it relates to transitions that you would recommend? So I want to make sure I capture the full question. Any books you recommend parents to read about this topic at the level transitions to middle school specifically? So middle schools and then transitions to high school. That was the exact question.
I would recommend certainly the How to Talk So Children Listen and Listen So Children Learn series. They're all written in comic style, and they're often written about middle school and older students. And I think those are really helpful.
Yeah. As for like about the topic of transition specifically, I don't think I have anything at the top of mind, but I've written it down and we will look up a couple of things to share in the follow-up.
Yeah.
One uplift us, comment a parent made. I found priming was insightful and it forces a parent to take a moment to think like our kids. So wanted to uplift that definitely. 3 and 4 seem to be our most powerful in our voting chat. So just want to keep you apprised. If you haven't voted, please. Would definitely love to still folks to vote. Yes. For anyone that entered in late, this is being recorded and you will have access to this recording tomorrow evening, as well as the resources. So yes, this session is being recorded. You will have access to the resources, the PowerPoint deck, and the templates that have been suggested. So you will have access to all of those. You'll receive that in the same email inbox that you used to register for this evening's webinar session. So keep some of those questions in. We have time to take 2 to 3 more. Here is one. How can we help a child that is nonverbal with transitioning?
Yep, great question. If a child is non-speaking, no matter the topic, the first thing I go to is that a child has some means of communicating, expressing their feelings, needs, wants, thoughts. That's really important. So I hope the child that is being described has some communication method, whether that be visual, typing, technological assistive tech related, AAC to help with communication. It's just vital. And as I said, no matter the topic, whether we're talking about transition and change and priming, or we're talking about learning about requests and wants and needs and any other topic, right? So that's a starting point, because all of the things we've discussed are all in this idea of a discussion, a co-creation, not just something that we are imparting upon someone as the adult to the child. And then I guess I would just add that using a visual support can be a powerful way to have a shared frame of reference, a shared kind of tool to be looking at together. And so I would, recognizing that when a child is non-speaking, it doesn't mean that they're not able to, or that they necessarily have challenges with receptive language, with hearing what we say verbally. I do think visual does create a sort of common point of connection, so that we can refer to the visual, and whether that's a map or a drawing, a schedule that can
a
be
list.
pointed to or referred to.
We also don't know if this child has written language.
Mhm.
And so you might want to add written language to visuals. You might want to not have any written language and just have images, if that's helpful.
All right, perfect. I know we're at time, but if we can just take one more last question, and then I'll just give some closing remarks for folks.
Absolutely.
What can be utilized for a limited expressive ASD student? So what can be utilized for a limited expressive ASD student?
I think the same kinds of supports that we were just talking about. I think also it's just, we often share a diagnosis, but what's more helpful is knowing different kinds of characteristics and traits. And so saying ASD could mean a million different things, right? Like, I'm autistic. Might present totally differently than other autistic people, so I think saying, maybe similarly to the last person, a child who has limited speaking language, we would want to just use more visuals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll echo what Cade said about differences in people and understanding traits as the starting point for knowing how to support. As a potential helpful generalization, really leaning into predictability can be a very important support for autistic folks. It's something I've both been exposed to in research, but also more importantly from autistic people. So the the more really leaning into, especially if we're talking about priming for transitions, the more concrete and predictable that priming work looks, the better. Meaning even more realistic drawings, photographs, maps, making sure that there's opportunity to maybe practice the route to the school, so you can see what streets you pass or how long it takes, things like that. The more predictable and the more prepared a child is for a new developing routine, the better. And certainly that can be helpful to any child, but maybe in particular for autistic children.
I would add to that however you start your priming, that's always the same. Like, I know it's really helpful for me. My partner will do this. We'll say, okay, we're going to go somewhere new this weekend. Let's sit down and let's talk about it. How are we going to get there? I want you to see the map also. I don't want to just be the only person looking at the map. And so I know that anytime we're going to go somewhere new, that's going to be the routine of how we start, so that I feel prepared. And so it's important to have the same kinds of tools that you're giving every time, but also the same structure around priming can be really helpful and powerful.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much. It looks like 3 and 4 are pretty much evenly split as our top votes for this evening. So 3 and 4. So thank you for that insight. So just dropping in our chat for everyone to see. If you are not aware of, the New York City Department of Ed's Special Education Advisory Council now has an active website for you to be apprised of their meetings, as well as resources that are coming out of that advisory council, which is Reimagining Special Education. So we're dropping that link in for our parents to have access to that new webpage on our schools.nyc.gov website. Our rest of our May webinar sessions for the Beyond Access series session are live and active for registration as well on our schools.nyc.gov website. We're dropping that link in the chat so you can access that. And you can see this recording and the 2 other sessions. We dropped the visual support session earlier up in the chat, but you will get access to that session as well as our strength-based language session that was hosted by Aaron and Cade all throughout the month of April. So we'll put together a great compilation of those sessions so you can link in, you can view those if you missed them. So we'll provide that to you in our follow-up communication emails. It has been a tremendous pleasure working with you both. You will be missed, but we'll make sure to pull them back in for future sessions before you know it. Thank you for spending time with us this evening. I know that we're over time, but thank you for being patient and working with us. So much great follow-up questions, concerns. Please feel free to direct any future questions to specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov. Again, that's specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov. And we'll make sure if you have any questions specific to Erin and Cade that we'll forward those to them as well, to our general inbox. But please direct any questions, even if it comes up tonight, tomorrow, the next day. That's the best way to get quick and easy responses. But we thank you for your time. It has been a pleasure, and we'll see you at a future Beyond Access series session next week. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye, all. Thanks again.
Bye, thanks.
Good night.